The hum of the Orion station faltered for a split second, followed by the sharp shriek of an alarm. Commander Sarah Jensen stood at the central control panel, eyes narrowing as the anomaly indicators flashed red. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly. "What the hell is that?" whispered Dr. Talen, his voice uncharacteristically tense. He stood beside Sarah, gripping the edge of the console as though it might somehow anchor him to reality. Sarah's fingers flew over the controls, her mind racing. The readings didn't match anything in the station's database. A massive energy surge, followed by a drop in atmospheric pressure in Sector 9. The station had systems designed to prevent such a breach, but something was bypassing all of them. "This isn't a simple malfunction," Sarah said, her voice steady but her gut tightening. She wasn't one to panic, but the hair on the back of her neck stood up. "Get the security teams to Sector 9 now." She keyed in a few commands, pulling up the station's visual feed. The grainy images showed several crew members in the corridor, looking confused as something undulating and dark slithered across the walls. No one was sure what it was, but it was definitely alive, and moving. "Commander, I'm seeing biological activity in the air vents," said Lieutenant Torres, her voice coming through the comm system, shaken but clear. "Something's growing inside the walls." "Bioactivity? What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Talen muttered under his breath. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the screen, frustration mounting as his usual confident demeanor faltered. As a xenobiologist, he had seen strange things, but nothing like this. Sarah didn't respond. She couldn't afford to waste time. Her mind was already calculating a dozen potential scenarios, none of them good. The door to the control room slid open with a soft hiss, and Lieutenant Torres stormed in, her face pale. "The creature, whatever it is, it's spreading faster than we anticipated. The whole station's at risk, Commander. Seal off the corridors leading to Sector 9, Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. "And set up quarantine measures in every section near it. Dr. Talen, I need you to analyze its structure. You're our only chance of figuring out what we're dealing with." Talen stiffened, a flash of pride flickering across his face. "Understood, Commander." He rushed toward the nearby lab, already muttering to himself about containment protocols and analysis equipment. Sarah watched him go, a flicker of doubt creeping into her mind. Talen was brilliant, but his obsession with discovery sometimes clouded his judgment. This wasn't a time for curiosity. It was a time for survival. The station's automated systems flickered again, and a soft whine echoed through the walls. It was as if the entire structure was, groaning, reacting to the invasion. The lights dimmed, and the usual hum of activity around them became a low, vibrating thrum that unsettled Sarah. "Commander, the parasite, if we can even call it that, it's feeding off the station's power grid. The energy readings are off the charts." Dr. Talen's voice crackled through the comms. Sarah cursed under her breath, eyes hardening. "Do what you have to do, Talen. We need answers, and we need them fast." As she turned back to the control panel, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. She couldn't let fear take hold, not now. She had led missions in hostile territories before, but this felt different. Alien. The parasite, whatever it was, wasn't just an external threat, it had infiltrated everything. "Commander, I'm tracking multiple energy signatures on the station's outer hull," Lieutenant Torres said, a hint of panic creeping into her tone. "Something's moving, it's like it's alive." Sarah's eyes darted to the readouts, heart skipping a beat. "Get the rest of the crew into lockdown. We need to contain it before it spreads." But in that instant, the station lurched, throwing Sarah forward. She caught herself against the control panel, heart pounding. The Orion was no longer just a research facility, it was under siege. And they had no idea what was attacking them. The emergency lights flickered in the dim hallway as Dr. Talen moved cautiously toward the lab. The rhythmic sound of his footsteps echoed eerily, amplifying the silence that had descended on Orion Station. He tried to ignore the faint, unsettling whisper of movement from the ventilation shafts above. His focus was on the sealed container he'd prepared to contain any samples he could collect, if he survived long enough to analyze them. The door to the lab slid open with a soft hiss, and Taylan slipped inside, letting out a sigh of relief. For now, at least, he was safe. As he worked, his mind raced through a checklist of containment protocols, trying to devise a plan that wouldn't lead to catastrophic failure. Suddenly, the lab's intercom crackled. "Taylan, report," Commander Sarah Jensen's voice demanded, steely with urgency. "We need information on this thing. It's spreading too fast to ignore." "I'm doing everything I can, Commander," Taylan replied, his voice edged with frustration. "But I need more time. Whatever this entity is, it's unlike any life form I've encountered. It seems to be adapting, almost learning, from our responses." A tense silence followed, then Sarah's voice broke through. "We don't have much time. Half of the station's life support systems are compromised. I need solutions." "I'll have them," Taylan answered, more confidently than he felt. He ended the call, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't afford mistakes. As he prepared a microscope slide from a fragment he'd scraped from one of the infected air vents, Taylan noticed something strange. The sample pulsated softly, almost as if alive, radiating a faint blue light. He adjusted the microscope, peering down to get a better look. Under magnification, he saw the entity's intricate structure, a network of fibers and cellular nodes that seemed to shimmer, rearranging itself in real time. His stomach tightened. This was no ordinary parasite. It was something sentient, something capable of strategic adaptation. A slight tremor shook his hands as he recorded the findings, mind racing with implications. If this thing could learn, it was only a matter of time before it figured out the weaknesses in their defenses. "Taylan!" The door to the lab burst open as Lieutenant Torres stumbled in, her face flushed with panic. "Sector 9's breached containment. It's spreading into the lower levels, and there are reports of hallucinations from crew members near infected zones." Taylan's blood ran cold. "Hallucinations?" "Yes," Torres replied, her eyes wide with alarm. "They're seeing things. I don't know how, but whatever this entity is, it's affecting their minds." Taylan gritted his teeth, grasping the grim reality. "It's not just a biological invader, it's a psychological one too." A sudden, low rumble shook the station, making Torres stumble. An eerie silence followed, broken only by the faint, distorted sound of voices echoing through the air vents. It was as if the station itself was speaking, whispering unintelligible words that sent chills down their spines. "We have to stop it before it spreads to the rest of the station," Torres said, her voice wavering. "What's your plan?" Taylan clenched his fists, his gaze hardening. "We lure it into an isolated section, one we can sacrifice if necessary. We'll have to manually deactivate its access to power and oxygen. Maybe, just maybe, it will starve." Torres nodded, fear shadowing her eyes but determination solidifying her expression. "Then let's do it." As they left the lab, the lights dimmed again, casting long, eerie shadows along the corridor. The sense of impending doom was almost tangible, tightening the air around them. Taylan took a steadying breath, trying to quell the doubt gnawing at him. The entity was intelligent, relentless, and now, it was in their heads. But if they failed, there would be no one left to warn the galaxy of the silent menace lurking aboard Orion Station. The hum of the emergency lights faded as Dr. Taylan and Lieutenant Torres crept down the narrow corridor, their footsteps softened by the heavy tension weighing on them. Taylan clutched a handheld scanner, its screen flickering faintly with readings from the entity's movements. Every so often, the device would pulse, confirming that the life form was close, too close. "Are we sure this is going to work?" Torres whispered, her voice tight. The plan was a desperate one, built on the hope that they could trap the entity in a section of the station cut off from power and life support. Taylan's jaw tensed. "It has to. If we don't lure it into the isolation wing and shut the doors in time." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implications hung heavily between them. The alternative was unthinkable. Their path led them to Sector 12, the designated containment area, a block of maintenance corridors used mainly for storage, far from critical systems. As they approached, the flickering lights above dimmed entirely, plunging them into darkness. A chill settled over the corridor, and Talen's pulse quickened. "Stay close," he said, gripping his scanner like a lifeline. He could feel Torres's presence just behind him, her breathing steady despite the fear they both shared. Suddenly, a faint, ghostly sound echoed through the corridor, whispers, soft but distinct, filling the air like an insidious presence. Talen shivered. It was as if the station itself had become the entity's voice, drawing them closer with promises of secrets he had no desire to uncover. "Do you hear that?" Torres's voice was barely audible, strained with an uncharacteristic tremor. "It's adapting," Talen replied, his voice barely a breath. "This thing is learning how to reach us." They moved forward, pressing on until they reached the control room at the end of the hallway. The door to the isolation wing loomed ahead, an unremarkable steel barrier, yet tonight, it represented their only chance at survival. Talen tapped at the console, fingers trembling as he initiated the lock sequence. "There," he whispered. "Now we wait." For a tense moment, silence filled the room. Then, with a low rumble, the walls began to vibrate, a subtle pulse radiating outward as though the station itself were alive. The scanner's screen flared, displaying a complex array of signals, one unmistakably stronger than the others, moving directly toward them. "It's coming," Talen muttered. He could feel his heart pounding, each beat underscored by the faint sound of footsteps, alien and unnatural, reverberating through the walls. "Get ready," Torres whispered, her fingers hovering over the emergency controls that would seal the isolation door the moment the entity entered. As the footsteps grew louder, an icy, pervasive dread seeped into Talen's bones. Just when he thought he could bear the tension no longer, the entity materialized at the edge of the control room's flickering light. It was a shimmering, amorphous mass, like liquid mercury, gliding forward with unsettling fluidity. Tendrils of bioluminescent energy radiated from its core, pulsing with an eerie intelligence. "Now!" Talen barked, and Torres slammed her fist onto the control panel. The doors hissed shut with a metallic clang, and the entity paused, as if sensing its trap. For a split second, its glow intensified, illuminating the room in an otherworldly blue hue. Then, as if realizing it had been defeated, it recoiled, retreating deeper into the isolation wing. Talen exhaled, a mix of relief and terror flooding through him. They'd managed to contain it, at least for now. But even as he felt a sliver of triumph, an uneasy thought settled in his mind. They had outsmarted the creature this time, but it was watching, learning. Turning to Torres, he forced a grim smile. "We bought ourselves time," he said. "But we're going to need a plan. A real one." As they left the control room, the faint whispers resumed, now seeming to echo with a trace of bitterness, as though the entity were plotting its next move. And deep down, Talen knew their fight had only just begun. The low hum of the station's emergency power barely masked the whispers coming from the isolation wing. Dr. Talen and Lieutenant Torres stood just outside the containment door, their breaths shallow and minds racing. The entity was awake, its pulse a faint, rhythmic light visible through the thick glass. "Are we really doing this?" Torres asked, her fingers twitching over her holstered weapon. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a glint of doubt. She'd faced countless dangers in her career, but this was something else entirely. Talen nodded, his gaze locked on the glowing mass behind the glass. "If we don't, it'll adapt. We might not get another chance to understand it." His voice was tense, yet resolved. After hours of analyzing the creature's behaviors and responses, he'd finally pieced together a theory. The entity wasn't just a threat, it was a messenger, albeit one that communicated through an alien and dangerous form of empathy, seeking to connect by overwhelming its hosts with shared knowledge. "We can't contain it forever," he continued. "It's trying to reach us, to communicate. And if we're going to stop this, we have to understand what it's trying to say." The plan was as simple as it was perilous. Open the containment door and allow the entity a controlled connection, limited to a few seconds. Long enough, they hoped, for Talen to glean its intentions, but short enough to prevent a full takeover. Torres inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Fine. But if you even flinch, I'm hitting the failsafe. With one last look, Taylen placed his hand on the door controls, nodding to signal his readiness. The door slid open, releasing a wave of cold air that swept over them, bringing with it the faint, haunting hum of the entity. The alien presence moved, gliding closer as if drawn to them, its tendrils of light pulsing with eerie, calculated intelligence. Taylen closed his eyes, letting the entity's energy brush against his consciousness. In an instant, his mind flooded with sensations, images, sounds, an overwhelming rush of emotions, disjointed yet profound. He saw vast, empty expanses, felt the echo of civilizations that had thrived and fallen, the silent screams of beings lost to time. And within it all, a message: survival. It wasn't hostility that drove it but desperation. The connection deepened, pulling him further into a well of fragmented memories, visions of destruction, of worlds left barren. Taylen's heart pounded as he realized the truth: the entity was a refugee, fleeing a threat even more devastating. It had latched onto them out of instinct, a survival mechanism misinterpreted as aggression. Taylen! Torres's voice snapped him back. He opened his eyes, realizing he'd drifted too close. The creature's tendrils now wrapped inches from his face, its glow intensifying. Enough! Torres shouted, slamming the door controls. The barrier closed with a hiss, sealing the entity once more. Staggering back, Taylen gasped for air, his mind spinning with the weight of the connection. It's trying to warn us, he managed, clutching his head as he steadied himself. There's something out there, something worse than we imagined. This creature, it's running from it. Torres's eyes narrowed, digesting his words. So this isn't the threat? No, Taylen whispered, the memory of the entity's warning still vibrating in his mind. But whatever's coming, it's on its way. And it might be beyond anything we're prepared to face. They exchanged a look, both understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. Their enemy was no longer the entity, but the unseen force it fled from, a force that would require them to push humanity's resilience and unity to its limits. As the station returned to a strained silence, Taylen and Torres braced themselves for the battle that loomed on the horizon, one they would face not alone, but with the alien intelligence they had come to understand as their only ally.